Hi! During the last video I talked about the adjustments I needed to make to the McCalls pattern M6891 to make sure that they fit my 5-foot body and my D cup full bust area. So in this video we'll talk about the different techniques that are needed to be able to sew this pattern, and then I'll also talk about and show you what the actual final product looks like. You can see a little bit of a sneak peek behind me, and I hope you like it, but as we go I'll share more about the whole process. So to sew the McCalls pattern, you will need a machine that is able to stitch a variety of different stitches. The main stitch is the straight stitch. You need to be able to sew the straight stitch in a variety of stitch lengths. That also includes machine basting, which means pretty much the straight stitch in the biggest lengths that you can get to secure the fabrics together. You should be able also to be able to back stitch to secure some of the seams, especially at the ends or at the bottom, so that they don't start to pull apart along the pockets, to make sure that the seam stays nice and flat and doesn't go in the direction you don't want it to go. And also zigzag stitch. So I can show you an example in this. I actually finished off, I do have a serger or an overlocker, and I could have done an overlocker, but I felt that with this dress it would be a little bit bulky. So instead I actually did a zigzag stitch around all the edges. Seams, there are different also seams that you will need to do. So just to show you a little bit, so this is the open flat seam. This is on the shoulders. I've used an open flat seam. So pretty much you sew it and then iron it flat. I finished off with a zigzag, which you can see there. Yeah, so that was the open flat seam at the shoulders. I also used a different type of seam, which actually didn't learn in my fashion design course, but I actually saw it on Instagram, and I've heard about it a few times as well, and it's actually called flat felled seam. So the technique is that you sew it together, and then what you do is you cut one of the seams allowances in half, and then fold the other seam allowance over the other one and sew on top. So here you can see, let me just see if I can do it better. Example, this is what flat felled seams looks like on the inside. On the outside you will have, and I'll show you this, it will look, you'll have the seam, and then you have a row of stitching of about 5 millimeters next to it. Because this is under the arm, I wasn't very concerned about having the extra stitching there. So I decided to try this seam. And also the other thing is, this is a cuffed dress where you can roll up the sleeves, and it actually has a tab, and I'll show you. It actually has a tab where you can, over here, it has a tab which allows you to have the sleeve rolled up. And the reason why I did the flat fold seam is because it actually looks really nicely when it is folded over. I didn't want to have any open seams or open open seams in the actual sleeve, so that they wouldn't look a bit funny. The other, because there are actually two seams on the sleeve, I actually did another type of kind of seam finish as well, just to show the different types of techniques that we can use. So this seam is actually called a clean finish seam, so you can see that there. Okay, so the clean finish seam is you finish a seam the normal way you would do it. You sew it, iron it flat, and then what you do with the seam allowance, you fold each seam allowance under, and then you do almost like a top stitch on top. So the rough edge is underneath it. I actually find this seam is nice finish. However, you can still see sometimes peaks of raw edge if it's folded a bit funny, whereas the flat felled seam inside, when you roll it in, it actually looks a lot neater. So if I were to do it again, I'd probably do a flat felled seam on all the different seams. And like I said, you also can do zigzag seam, and I did show that, but just to reinforce it, I did a zigzag seam over here. That's the middle of the skirt back, to be able to finish it nicely and neatly, so that when you actually see the inside of the garment, it looks quite nice. Okay, so that's all the different seams. We also did a curved seam around the sleeve head. So yeah, in this next part of the video, I'm actually going to take this dress down and show you some close-up of the different techniques that you will need to know to be able to do this pattern. So starting from some of the simple things, once you have the bodice, you will need to be able to do the darts and sew them neatly. So there are 4 darts that you will need to do. So let me just find the right way up. So there are 4 types of darts. So these you might see is the back darts. They are quite narrow, and it's just so that it shapes around your back nicely. There are also front darts, and as I've mentioned in my previous video, I needed to adjust them. So these darts are a little bit bigger. You can see them they're quite big, and they sew into the side seam there. So you've got 2 sets of darts, so 4 darts, and as with any darts, you make sure you match the lines, and then at the end over here you sew to the end. I'm not sure if you can see, and then what I do is I tie it into a knot over here and cut it off, so there's a little bit there. You don't want to backstitch over those because then you will end up with pointy boobs, which nobody wants. So that's the darts. Another technique that you will use in the actual garment is pleating. And it's not much, and it's kind of hard to navigate this, but the pleating is actually in the sleeve. So this is the sleeve, and there is a pleat there that you can see. So in terms of the dress, you will learn how to, or if you don't, you should probably know already how to line different pieces. So there you will be using some lining, and here you can see it. The lining will be inserted in the cuffs, in the collar, in the front facing here, and it will help to stabilize those areas. So also as part of the sewing, you will learn how to do a collar, and I actually found this collar and the instructions to do this collar really straightforward. They are very detailed and make a lot of sense. So so yeah, you end up doing a collar, sewing it in. You have to be very precise when it comes to, like you can see the different edges there. You need to be very precise around the corners, making sure you push them out as much as you can and sew them at an angle. I used one of those corner pushes out, and I don't know what they're called, and they actually turned out really well. I'm really happy with it, and I'll try to take some better photos of this, but yeah, and post them on my Instagram. But they're actually quite sharp corners, which is really good. The other thing with the collar is that at the end you will need to attach the collar to the facing, and then attach the facing to the shoulder seam on both sides, and then lastly hand stitch the inside of the collar to the actual inside of the dress. It was hand stitching. There was quite a bit of hand stitching in this pattern, but I actually really enjoyed that bit, and being able to try out that skill and hone that skill even further. So that's the collar. The cuffs, again, there are lots of different techniques in the cuffs. So first of all, again, make sure that the corners are nice and pushed out. In the cuff, there is also, like I mentioned, the pleat earlier. You will also need to finish the inside edge of the actual cuff. So what they recommend is that you fold it in and then hand stitch it down, which I did there. There is also another technique that they shared, and they also shared two different techniques of attaching the cuffs. However, I used the technique I learned in my course, fashion design and dressmaking course, to be able to insert this cuff, and it worked really well. Again, hand stitched inside of the cuff, and you can see that there a little bit. I'm not sure how close this is going to look. Also, yeah, sewing on buttonholes. I actually for this project was the first time that I learned how to sew on buttonholes with my button sewer thingy, button foot, and I was so amazed how quick it was, because there's 14 buttons that you need to attach with this pattern. So otherwise, if I didn't know how to do that, that would have taken me hours, whereas with the machine it took literally a couple minutes. The other thing that we also learn how to do is, you know, obviously buttonholes. So this is an example of the buttonholes. These are already cut, so they will fray a little bit in the middle where they are cut, but you can see I used really tight stitch, so once they're like finally formed, it will look fine. All right, so you're probably wondering why my buttonholes are so far away. I actually moved them closer in down, because I found that this cuff was a little bit big on me. If I was to scale it down, I would have to do a lot more pleating, which I didn't want to adjust the pattern that much more. Instead, I've just moved the buttonholes so that they tighter around my wrist. Having said that, I think with this dress I really like the cuffed look with this dress, so I think I will wear it a lot as cuffed. Okay, so we've talked about a few of the techniques. Another technique is we also did, and I might just actually put this up. Let's see if you can see it really well. So there's also inline pockets, so in there, into the sides of the skirt. These pockets are quite nice, and I'll just show it quickly, and I'll bring it closer. There is understitching in there, which I spoke about earlier as well. I mentioned there are lots of techniques, different stitches, different techniques, different elements to the dress that are really interesting and that will really try your skills and build your experience in sewing. So I do recommend this pattern. It is a lovely pattern. It is not for the faint-hearted. It's not a quick sew, but it is really rewarding when you actually finish it and see it in real life. So next, what I will do is showcase the dress on me. So hopefully the fit is perfect.